Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Bore You to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from Rambles in Germany and Italy, written by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley and published in 1844. This story looks at an English traveller and their journey through Germany and Italy. My name is Teddy, and I am to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest that you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those new to the podcast, it started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I'm so grateful for the amazing community we have built together. This podcast is self-made and self-produced, which is why you'll hear a short ad at the beginning of each episode. These ads, along with support from subscribers and patrons, enable me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. Thank you to everyone who took the time to share words of gratitude with me during the week. Whether through the website or your podcast app, your messages mean the world to me. A special thanks to new subscribers via Spotify for podcasters, as well as all existing subscribers and Patreon sponsors. My goal is to keep this podcast free and accessible to everyone. That is why you hear this quick ad at the beginning of each episode. It helps generate financial support for the creation of the podcast. If you find the podcast beneficial and would like to support it, there are a few ways you can contribute. Firstly, you can follow the podcast in your app and leave a comment. Become a subscriber for $2.99 per month simply by clicking on the link in the show notes. This also removes the Spotify ads. If subscribing is not an option, an easy way to help is by leaving a review and rating. Even one sentence really helps out. You can always say hello to me at boytosleep.com, where you can support the podcast as well. And if you know anyone else out there who may need a good night's rest, please feel free to share the podcast with them. In the meantime, lie back, relax, and enjoy the readings. Rambles in Germany and Italy in 1840, 1842, and 1843 by Mrs. Shelley, in 2 volumes, Volume 1. Preface. I have found it a pleasant thing, while travelling, to have in the carriage the works of those who have passed through the same country. Sometimes they inform, sometimes they excite curiosity. If alone, they serve as society. If with others, they suggest matter for conversation. These volumes were thus originated, visiting spots often described, pursuing a route such as form for the most part the common range of the tourist. I could tell nothing new, except as each individual's experience possesses novelty. While I passed in haste from city to city, as I travelled through mountain passes or over vast extents of country, I put down the daily occurrences, a guide, a pioneer, or simply a fellow traveller, for those who came after me. When I reached Italy, however, and came south, I found that I could say little of Florence and Rome, as far as regarded the cities themselves. That had not been said so often and so well before, that I was satisfied to select from my letters such portions merely as touched upon subjects that I had not found mentioned elsewhere. It was otherwise as regarded the people, especially in a political point of view, and in treating of them my scope grew more serious. I believe that no one can mingle much with the Italians without becoming attached to them. Their faults injure each other, their good qualities make them agreeable to strangers. Their courtesy, their simplicity of manner, their evident desire to serve, their rare and exceeding intelligence, give to the better specimens among the higher classes, and to many among the lower, a charm all their own. In addition, therefore, to being a mere gossiping companion to a traveller, I would fain say something that may incite others to regard them favourably, something explanatory of their real character. But to speak of the state of Italy and the Italians, when I began I put together what I knew. I found it too scant of circumstance and experience to form a whole. I could only sketch facts, guess at causes, hope for results. I have little, therefore, but what I have, I believe that I may safely declare, may be depended upon. Time was when travels in Italy were filled with contemptuous censures of the effeminacy of the Italians, diatribes against the vice and cowardice of the nobles, sneers at the courtly verses of the poets, who were content to celebrate a marriage or a birth among the great. Their learned men fared better, for there were always writers in Italy, whose names adorned European letters, yet still contempt was the general tone, and of late years travellers, with the exception of Lady Morgan, whose book is dear to the Italians, parrot the same, not because these things still exist, but because they know no better. Italy is, indeed, much changed. Their historians no longer limit themselves to disputing dates, but burn with enthusiasm for liberty. Their poets, Manzoni and Niccolini at their head, direct their efforts to elevating and invigorating the public mind. The country itself wears a new aspect. It is struggling with its fetters, not only with the material ones that weigh on it so heavily, and which they endure with a keen sense of shame, but with those that have entered into and bind the soul, superstition, luxury, servility, indolence, violence, and vice. Since the date of these letters, Italy has been much disturbed, but the risings and their unfortunate consequences to individuals are regarded by us with contempt, or excite only a desire of putting an end to them as detrimental to the sufferers, without being of any utility to the cause of civilization and moral improvement. Yet it ought not to be forgotten that the oppression suffered in that portion of the country which has been recently convulsed is such as to justify Dr. Johnson's proposition that if the abuse be enormous, nature will rise up, and, claiming her original rights, overturn a corrupt political system. Englishmen in particular ought to sympathize in their struggles, for the aspiration for free institutions all over the world has its source in England. Our example first taught the French nobility to seek to raise themselves from courtiers into legislators. The American War of Independence, it is true, quickened this impulse by showing the way to a successful resistance to the undue excise of authority, but the seed was all sown by us. The swarms of England that overrun Italy keep the feeling alive. An Italian gentleman naturally envies an Englishman, hereditary or elective legislator. He envies his pride of country, in which he himself can in no way indulge. He knows at best that his sovereign is a weak tool in the hands of a foreign potentate, and that all that is aimed at by the governments that rule him is to benefit Austria, not Italy. But this forms but a small portion of his wrongs. He sees that we enjoy the privilege of doing and saying whatever we please, so that we infringe no law. If he write a book, it is submitted to the censor, and if it be marked by any boldness of opinion, it is suppressed. If he attempt any plan for the improvement of his countrymen, he is checked. If a tardy permission be given him to proceed, it is clogged with such conditions as nullify the effect. If he limit his endeavours to self-improvement, he is suspected, surrounded by spies, while his friends share in the odium that attaches to him. The result of such persecution is to irritate or discourage. He either sinks into the Circean sty, in which so many drag out a degraded existence, or he is irresistibly impelled to resist. No way to mitigate the ills he groans under, or to serve his countrymen, is open except secret societies. The mischievous effects of such to those who are implicated in them are unspeakably great. They fear a spy in the man who shares their oath. Acts are dark, and treachery hovers close. The result is inevitable. Their own moral sense is tampered with and becomes vitiated. Or if they escape this evil, and preserve the ingenuineness of a free and noble nature, they are victims. While thus every passion, bad and good, ferments, a touch is given, and up springs armed revolt. This must be put down, or the peace of Europe will be disturbed. Peace is a lovely thing. It is horrible to image the desolation of war, the cottage burnt, the labour of the husbandman destroyed, outrage and death there, where security of late spread smiles and joy, and the fertility and beauty of Italy exaggerates still more the hideousness of the contrast. Can it not be that peaceful mediation and a strong universal sense of justice may interpose, instead of the cannon and bayonet? There is another view to be taken. We have lately been accustomed to look on Italy as a discontented province of Austria, forgetful that her supremacy dates only from the downfall of Napoleon. From the invasion of Charles VIII till 1815, Italy has been a battlefield where the Spaniard, the French, and the German have fought for mastery, and we are blind indeed if we do not see that such will occur again, at least among the two last. Supposing a war to arise between them, one of the first acts of aggression on the part of France would be to try to drive the Germans from Italy. Even if peace continue, it is felt that the papal power is tottering to its fall. It is only supported because the French will not allow Austria to extend her dominions, and the Austrian is eager to prevent any change that may afford pretense for the French to interfere. Did the present Pope act with any degree of prudence, his power thus propped might last some time longer, but as it is, who can say how soon, for the sake of peace in the rest of Italy, it may not be necessary to curtail his territories. The French feel this and begin to dream of dominion across the Alps. The occupation of Ancona was a feeler put out. It gained no positive object except to check Austria. For the rest, its best effect was to reiterate the lesson they have often taught, that no faith should be given to their promises of liberation. The Italians consider that the hour will arrive sooner or later when the stranger will again dispute for dominion over them, when the peace of their wealthy towns and smiling villages will be disturbed by nations meeting in hostility on their soil. The efforts of their patriots consequently tend to make preparation that such an hour may find them. They feel the necessity also of numbering military leaders among themselves. The most enlightened Italians, instead of relying on the mystery of oaths, the terror of assassination, the perpetual conspiracy of secret associations, are anxious that their young men should exercise themselves in some school of welfare. They wish that the new generation may be emancipated by their courage, their knowledge, their virtues, which should oppose an insurmountable barrier to foreign invasion, and awe their rulers into concession. Niccolini, in his latest work, Arnaldo de Brescia, has put these sentiments in the mouth of his hero. That poem, replete with passionate eloquence and striking incident, presents a lively picture of the actual state of Italy. The insolence of the German, the arrogance of the popes, the degraded state of the people, and the aspirations of the patriots each find a voice. It is impossible not to hope well for a country whose poets, whose men of reflection and talent, without one exception, all use the gifts of genius or knowledge to teach the noblest lessons of devotion to their country, and whose youth receive the same with devoted enthusiasm. When we visit Italy, we become what the Italians were censured for being, enjoyers of the beauties of nature, the elegance of art, the delights of climate, the recollections of the past, and the pleasures of society, without a thought beyond. Such to a great degree was I while there, and my book does not pretend to be a political history or dissertation. I give fragments, not a whole. Such as they are, I shall be repaid for the labour and anxiety of putting them together, if they induce some among my countrymen to regard with greater attention, and to sympathize in the struggles of a country the most illustrious and the most unfortunate in the world. Brighton, June 13, 1840. I am glad to say that our frequent discussions of this spring have terminated in a manner very agreeable to everyone concerned in them. My son and his two friends have decided on spending their summer vacation on the shores of the Lake of Como, there to study for the degree, which they are to take next winter. They wish me to accompany them, and I gladly consent. Can it indeed be true that I am about to revisit Italy? I have been spending the last 2 months at Richmond. What a divine spring we have had. During the month of April, not a drop of rain fell. The sun shone perpetually. The foliage, rich and bright, lent before its time thick shadows to the wood. No place is more suited than Richmond where to enjoy the smiles of so extraordinary a season. I spent many hours of every day on the Thames, days as balmy as midsummer, and animated with the young life which makes fine weather in spring more delicious than that to be enjoyed in any other season of the year. Then the earth is an altar, from which fresh perfumes are forever rising, not the rank odours of the autumnal fall, but those attendant on the first bursting of life, on the tendency of nature in springtide to multiply and enjoy. I visited Hampton Court and saw the cartoons, those most noble works of the Prince of Painters. All was delightful, and 10 times more so, that I was about to break a chain that had long held me across the Channel, and wander far towards a country which memory painted as a paradise. We are to leave England at the conclusion of the Cambridge term, and have agreed to rendezvous at Paris in the middle of June. Towards the end of May I came here, intending at the appointed time to cross to Dieppe. The weather at first continued delightful, but after a time a change has come, and June is set in cold, misty and stormy. A morbid horror of my sea voyage comes over me which I cannot control. On the day of which we were to cross, I had an attack of illness which prevented my going on board. It becomes a question whether we shall remain for the next packet in the middle of next week, with the chance of a long, tempestuous passage, or proceed along the coast to Dover. I prefer the latter. We left Brighton for Hastings, and arrived on a fine evening. The sea was calm and glorious beneath the setting sun. On our way we drove through St. Leonards-on-Sea. Some years ago I had visited Hastings, when a brig, drawn high and dry on the shore near William the Conqueror's stone, unlading building materials, was all that told of the future existence of this new town. It has risen like an exhalation, and seems particularly clean, bright and cheerful. The next day blew a fierce tempest. Our drive to Dover was singularly inclement and disagreeable. We arrived in the evening, very tired and uncomfortable. A gale from the northwest raged, and the sea, wild and drear, broke in vast surges on the shore. The following morning it rained in torrents, as well as blew. The day after, however, the sun shone bright, and the waves sparkled and danced beneath its early rays. We were on the beach by 7, and reached the steamer in a small boat. One of the annoyances attendant on embarking at Dover We had a rough passage, for some halfway over the wind grew into a gale. I lay down on deck, and by keeping very still, escaped sickness. In 2 hours and a half we were on the French coast. Why we left Dover so early, I cannot tell, since the tide did not serve to admit us into Calais harbour for an hour after our arrival. An hour of disagreeable tossing at last, happy sight. The fishing boats were seen coming out of the port, giving token that there was water enough for us to enter. We landed. I was quite well immediately, and laughed at my panic. We went to Robert's Hotel, a very good one, and the charges moderate. I made my experiment at a table, and disliked its noise and numbers very much. We were to proceed to Paris by the diligence, a disagreeable style of travelling, but the only one we could manage. We have forgotten night travelling in England, thanks to the railroads, to which, whatever their faults may be, I feel eternally grateful, for many a new scene have they enabled me to visit, and much of the honey of delightful recollections have I, by their means, brought back to my hive. A pleasant day it will be when there is one from Calais to Paris. We left Calais at about 10 in the forenoon. P chose the banquet as young Englishmen are apt to. It resembles more than any other part of this ponderous vehicle the outside of a stagecoach. There were some merry Irish students there also, who could not speak a word of French. They leapt down from the top at every possibility, so to tease the conducteur, who to his flock of travellers acts as shepherd and dog in one, gathering them together with the bark of "En route, messieurs," most authoritatively. I and my maid were in another room, with the 2 Frenchwomen from England. One was a governess at a school, coming for a holiday. She was young, and her eyes were accustomed to the English style. She found fault with the diligence. The elder one would not allow any fault, and if there were any deficiency, it was because things were not first-rate on this road. The road to Bordeaux was the grand one. The diligences there were Lord Mayor's carriages for splendour. The longest day has an end, and our hours of penance came to a close. We arrived in Paris, and found pleasant apartments taken for us at Hotel Chatham. Travelling by diligence had been an experiment for me. I was delighted to find that, with all my nervous suffering, whenever my mind was intensely or disagreeably occupied, I could bear the fatigues of a journey far better than I had ever done. Several years before, I had been a bad traveller, and even in a comfortable English travelling chariot, suffered great fatigue and even illness. When I returned from Italy, I had tried the diligence, and been knocked up, and obliged to abandon it after the first night. Yet then I enjoyed perfect health. Now I complained, and with reason, of most painful sensations, yet the fatigue I endured seemed to take away weariness instead of occasioning it. I felt light of limb and in good spirits. On the shores of France I shook the dust of accumulated cares from off me. I forgot disappointments and banished sorrow. Weariness of body replaced beneficially weariness of soul, so much heavier, so much harder to bear. There is a cheerfulness in the aspect of Paris, that at once enlivens the visitor. From the absence of drains, the state of the streets is filthy. The danger of being run over by hack cabs which turn short around the corners, and accelerate their pace on purpose to do so is imminent. The travel of the Tuileries and the Champs-Élysées is not half of inviting as the sward of Hyde Park. Yet there is an air of cheerfulness and lightsomeness about Paris, which seems to take the burthen from your spirits, which will weigh heavily on the other side of the Channel. Nor perhaps in any city in the world is there a scene more magnificent, to use their own word in their own sense, than the view at high noon or sunset from the terrace of the Tuileries near the river, overlooking the Seine and its bridges. We have spent a week agreeably in Paris, as we have several friends here. Our 2 companions are arrived. We are seriously preparing to set out on our travels. The Lake of Como is our destination, and we have put the general guidance of our route into the hands of one of the party. I was a little startled when I was told that I was to reach Como via Frankfurt. This is something like going to the line by the North Pole, but I am assured that the journey will be the more delightful and novel. I was shown our way on the map, Metz to Treves, then down the Mosel, unhackneyed ground, or rather water, to Koblenz, up the Rhine to Mayence, Frankfurt, and the Cevenna to the Lake of Como. These are nearly all new scenes to me. The portion of the Rhine we were to navigate I longed to revisit after an interval of many years. So this route being agreed upon, we have taken our places in the diligence for Metz. I feel a good deal of the gypsy coming upon me, now that I am leaving Paris. I bid adieu to all acquaintance and set out to wander in new lands, surrounded by companions fresh to the world, unacquainted with its sorrows, and who enjoy the zest every passing amusement. I myself, apt to be too serious, but easily awaken to sympathy, forget the past and the future, and am ready to be amused by all I see as much or even more than they. Among acquaintance in the everyday scenes of life, want of means brings with it mortification, to embitter still more the perpetual necessity of self-denial. In society, you are weighed with others according to your intrinsic possessions, your income, your connections, your position. Make all the weight. You yourself are a mere feather in the scale. But what are those to me now? My home is the readiest means of conveyance I can command, or the inn at which I shall remain at night. My only acquaintance, the companions of my wanderings, the single business of my life to enjoy the passing scene. We left Paris on the 25th of June, at 6 in the evening, and were 37 hours reaching Metz, a distance of about 200 miles, stopping only for half an hour at a time, and that only twice during the one day we were on the road. I suffered excessive fatigue during the 2 nights of this journey, partly on account of a cough I caught in Paris, but my health was not in the slightest degree hurt. The weather was very fine. The country we passed through was beautiful, abundant in corn and vines, then in midsummer luxuriance. There was a portion of those dull, vast plains so usual in France, but for the most part the country was varied into hill and dale, arable and forest land. The season setting in so genially in early spring, joined to the refreshing rains which have since succeeded, have caused rich promise of abundance to appear everywhere. I never remember feeling so intimately how bounteous a mother is, this fair earth, yielding such plenteous store of food to her children, and this food in its growth so beautiful to look on. How full of gratitude and love for the Creator does the beauty of the creation make us. By a sort of slovenly reasoning, we tell ourselves that, since we are born, sustenance is our due, but that all beyond. The beauty of the world and the sensations of transport it imparts springs from the immeasurable goodness of our Maker. True, we were also created to experience those emotions. God has not reduced our dwelling place, as Puritans would his, to a bare meeting house. All there is radiant in glorious colours, all imparts supreme felicity to the senses and the heart. Next to the consciousness of right and honour, God has shown that he loves best beauty and the sense of beauty, since he has endowed the visible universe so richly with the one, and made the other so keen and deep-seated an enjoyment in the hearts of his creatures. We passed through Chalon-sur-Maine, Clermont, and Verdun, the cornfields, the vineyards, clothing the uplands, the woods that varied the landscape, and the meandering river that gave it light and life, were all in their fairest summer dress. Plenty and peace brooded over a happy land. From a traveller in a diligence, no more detailed description of city, village, or scenery can be expected. I will only add that this was by far the most agreeable part of France I had ever traversed. And that concludes tonight's readings. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this story. If you are not quite tired yet, please feel free to listen to another episode of the Bore You to Sleep podcast. Until next time, good night.